On an original that we own. I have my own set of parts that I use, my own stock pattern and things like that. And basically, I didn't bring anything with me for a proper today, but what I start with a pre-carved stock. The only inletting that's done on it is a barrel channel. The first thing I do is get the barrel to fit into the stock in a channel, and then I breach the barrel, and then let the shape and inlet the uh, standing breech and the tang as a unit. That's the easiest way I found to do it. And then that basically locates the lock from the bolster of the gun, which in turn locate the triggers, and that determines what the length of pull that I want. That determines where the butt plate goes. If from the front trigger, measure from the front trigger to the center of the butt plate, and then the rest is pretty much just finishing the gun out. I use a forged nose cap that I make out of sheet metal and silver solder together, and that goes on, and the stock shapes with the parts. The parts pretty much determine the shape of the stock, and then the last thing I put on is the under rib, and then drill the ramrod hole once that's in place. I use on maple stocks. I use a nitric acid solution that I mix up. Put that on the wood and then hit it with a heat gun that turns it like a chocolatey brown color. And then I put some type of, depending on the gun I'm doing, some type of a darker walnut stain on top of that. And then for a finish, I use exterior spar varnish, um, not shiny, just the semi-gloss or the satin finish is what I'm trying to think of. Use a satin spar varnish. I thin it with alcohol or mineral spirits, or doesn't really matter. I thin it out to about the consistency of water. I put a little bit of Japan dryer in it to help it dry a little quicker. And then I apply that with wet dry auto body paper in about a 2-inch square pieces. I dip that into the varnish solution and sand it into the stock a small area at a time. And when I get like say one side of the butt covered that way, then I take an old sock or a soft cotton rag and rub off anything that'll come off. And I do that, go over the whole gun that way, and then set it aside overnight, let it dry, and the next day do the same thing over again until it gets to the glossiness of the finish that you want. Uh-oh. He's all right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. When I get the stock to the degree of finish that I want, I let it set for a couple of days until everything's good and dry, and then I go over it with a fine buffing wheel just to even things out. I do the wood and the metal, the whole thing. As far as the metal finish goes, I polish that to about 180 grit paper, and then depending on whether a customer wants a new or antique finish, if they want a new finish, I polish the metal bright and the proper parts to be case hardened. Well, the breech, both pieces of the breech, the trigger guard, trigger bar, butt plate, toe plate, and nose cap all get colored with an acetylene torch. You get a real small, real hot flame, and when you get the colors that you want, dip it in oil, and they set pretty good. They're pretty. It's really a pretty durable finish. or an antique gun, which is what I prefer because that's when you look at the old guns, that's the finish that you see, what you're used to seeing on an old gun. And I do the same thing, polish the metal bright with about 180, and then I either, depending on what I'm doing, I either color it, case color it just like a new finish, and then I apply a liberal coat of instant blue. I used up 4440 cold blue, cover the parts with that, and then submerge them in plain old Clorox bleach. And you have to watch it because sometimes it reacts pretty fast and sometimes it's slow. When it gets to be where it looks kind of rusty and crusty, I fish it out of the bleach, dry it usually with a hair dryer, hot heat gun to make the parts dry, and then lightly card it off with a very fine wire wheel. And that's pretty much the finish. So you have to keep oil on it because it'll keep working. It'll keep rusting for a couple weeks afterwards. So you have to keep an eye on it and keep a good coat of oil on the parts so they don't rust too far. And in a nutshell, that's pretty much the finishing of the guns. What I like to do maybe is turn it over to you guys, and if you got any questions or comments or anything, maybe just turn this into a bull session rather than going back and repeating what I said before. If anybody has any questions, please speak up.
How long, if you got a complicated patch box, how long does it take to cut that in?
The question was about an involved patch box, how long it takes to make it and cut them in. Well, that naturally depends on the complexity of the design that you're trying to accomplish. I make most all of my patch boxes. I just get the design that I want, draw it, cut and file it out, make the hinges and going on. So you can get several hours just in making the box. And then when you go to install it, they're a little tricky because the part of the stock that you're installing the box on is not flat. It's going to have a curvature to it. So I copy that as close as I can with the box that I've just made. I'll bend them and then lay it on the wood until it looks like it's pretty even all the way around. Then I start with the hinge and let the relieve the wood for the hinge, and that'll allow the two parts of the box to lay flat against the wood, draw around it with a good sharp pencil and stab it in, relieve the wood, and just go at it until it gets how I want it. Time wise, I get quite a bit of time in a box by the time you make it, fit it, and finish it. It depends on naturally what kind of a box it is, if it's a 4-piece box or a 2-piece or whatever. But I'll get probably, I'm going to guess, at least 20 hours in a relatively plain one. I'm not real fast. You can't get in a hurry doing that stuff, you know. But yeah, boxes can be very involved.
Yeah, upstairs I saw patch boxes with internal wood, like around where there's some wood that sticks through the patch box.
Piercings, yeah.
Yeah, piercings. I mean, that's just got to be time consuming.
They're time consuming. They take extra time, but they look nice when they're done. You know, but it's just a matter of going at it slowly, a little bit at a time, and you can't get carried away. If you get where you feel like you're wanting to cut a corner or you're getting tired or whatever, it's time to put it aside and come back and attack it the next day. Yeah, they're involved. They can get involved. The boxes, a lot of the original or some of the originals had a release button, usually in the toe of the stock. You push that and the box doors are spring loaded. You push the button and the door will pop open. And those they're good. They're not all made that way. I prefer what I call a cam over that doesn't have a release button. but it has a spring that's situated that when the box is closed, the spring tension holds it closed. And you just overcome that with your fingernail to open it up. But that way you'll never inordinately bump the release and have the door come open on you when you don't want it to. To me the cam overs are a much more practical way to go. They're a little easier to do too. So that helps. Anybody else?
Back on aging the barrel, the bleach solution that you use, is that heated in a tank?
No, the bleach, and then again you got to watch it because the same process, the same bleach, the same everything. One time you do it, it'll take 5 minutes. The next time you do it, it'll take an hour. You just have to play it by ear and do them one. Watch it as you go. What I do for a barrel, I polish it to about 180. I like the corners, the corners of the flats. I like those slightly rounded. I don't like them real square. They just don't look as finished to me as if they're slightly rounded. So I get those shaped the way I want, get it polished about 180, and then I take this 4440 cold blue, and I think the Birchwood case will probably work too. It's just I use the others. Put a little cotton rag and just dab it on kind of liberally. Don't rub it on, but dab it so it doesn't have a pattern to it, say. And then when I get the whole thing covered with the cold blue, I have a piece of PVC pipe, like 2-inch pipe, with a cap glued on one end, and I have a marker how much bleach I have to put in. So when I submerge the barrel, I plug getting ahead of myself a little bit. I plug the nipple hole where that goes with a quarter 28 screw and some silicone tape or Teflon tape. Plug that hole, and the barrel, the muzzle end, I have I made call them a mandrel where we want out of wood. And I drive that into the bore of the barrel, so that stops the bleach from running in there. You don't want it inside your barrel. I do put an oily rag down them first before I do this, just in case something leaks. But you plug the barrel, and I submerge that into the pipe filled with bleach, just plain old Clorox, not the no spill, not the flavored stuff, just plain old Clorox bleach. And then I'll let it set in there for a few minutes, a couple minutes, pull it out and see what it looks like. And if it's not rusted enough, put it back in, and a few minutes later, check it again. There's no set time. Sometimes it'll work almost instantly, and sometimes it takes longer. And then when I get it to where it's got a good start of rust on the whole thing, and it won't be even. You don't want it evenly done. You want it kind of modeled the way the old guns look. I take it out of the bleach, and I usually take a heat gun and dry it. I don't rinse it. If you rinse it with water, that'll change the pattern of the rust. You want to let it dry like it is. I heat it up with a heat gun until it turns red, gets it all dry, and then lightly go over it with a very fine wire wheel. And then when I get done with that, I put a good coat of oil on it. I have some old stuff from Brownells that's pretty good about stopping rust. I put that on it, and you have to watch it because that reaction won't stop for sometimes a couple weeks after you take it out of the bleach and cart it off and everything. It'll come back right through the oil. You just have to just keep an eye on it, maybe go over it with some oil soaked steel wool, and just keep an eye on it. Eventually it'll quit rusting. When you get done, I think they look pretty nice. They look more in line with what you see on the original guns. You go up, if you all haven't been upstairs, you need to go up and look at the displays we have up there. There's stuff there that you will see nowhere else. It's just a really great accumulation of St. Louis and Missouri guns. But you look at those, and you'll notice on the original guns, the finishes are not smooth, even and uniform. They're kind of modeled, and that's what I look for in the guns that I build. I want them to look like the real ones.
Now, when you're browning a barrel, you plug the bore up so you don't get that rust down in it.
Yeah, I take I leave the breech, the part that screws into the barrel. I leave that in the barrel. Leave that as one unit, and I take they're quarter 28 thread for the nipples. I take a quarter 28 screw, wrap Teflon tape around it, just like a plumber does. Screw that in, and that seals that end of the barrel. And then I'll take a cleaning patch with some whatever kind of oil you like, and just give a light coat of oil inside the bore just in case something does leak. And in the muzzle end, I have a turned plug that I drive into the bore, and that seals that. And I don't, when I put it down into the bleach, I try to hold the bleach about even with the top of the barrel so there's less pressure as far as making it want to seep into the bore. So it limits it, helps to keep it out of there that way. And as far as coloring the parts, I do that with a torch. You want a oxyacetylene torch with a real small, real hot flame, and you just have to do it by eye. Put it on the part. When it gets the color you want, you move on, and you can get it when it's going real well. You can walk the heat patterns onto the steel. When it gets the color you want, you can't let it set because it'll change colors, but you got to dip it in the oil right then, and that'll set those colors, and they're actually pretty durable. I've got guns that I did that to 20 years ago, and they still look fine, with a lot of use. It's not as durable as real case hardening, but it lasts a long time. Anybody else got any?
Rifles upstairs, are they all Hawken? Are they all St. Louis, all Missouri, or what? Or a mixture of?
There are a number of Hawken, original Hawken rifles up there. There's a whole bunch of contemporary guns that me and other guys have built. There are, in the back of the room, there are a couple Hawkens there, but there are several Missouri-made guns from various makers all over the state of Missouri. Down the sides, they're not all Hawken, but there are a lot of Hawken Gimmer Shop products. Demics, there's just a fantastic collection of especially St. Louis stuff, and a lot of really neat Missouri guns up there too. So it's well worth going up and taking the time and looking at the stuff and talking to the guys. And I know if you're there and interested, ask permission. I'll let you hold them. But it's really a wonderful thing.
Barrel keys. What size should the big end be?
You see a lot of questions about that. To my knowledge, very few makers ever put them in with the key head on the lock side. Armstrong was probably the most prominent one I think of right now that always put his in backwards, if you will. The other way, the key heads are on the off side of the gun. And we've talked about this and thought about it at length. Why did they do that? The only thing that I can come up with is the heads on that side. When you lay the gun down, normally you lay it down with the lock up. You don't usually lay them down with the lock down. Well, if you lay it down with the lock up, the key head is laying against the surface. It's less apt to come out. They're just in there by friction. There's not a whole lot holding them in. But that's the only thing I can come up with. A lot of guys put them in the other way because the key heads look good on the lock side of the gun. But, to the best of my knowledge, the Hawken, they came out of the shop the other way.
Can you describe the process of getting the butt plate
that's the butt plates are probably, well, two items. The butt plate and the entry pipe are, to me, the most tedious parts to put on the gun. The entry pipes are pretty complicated because you have to have it has to set in the gun in a proper depth so you don't get a gap between the ramrod and the underrib on the gun when you're done. So they have to be the proper depth, and they have to be straight because the ramrod has to go through them into the stock. And when you drill the ramrod hole on a forearm, that's probably about 18 inches that you have to get the drill to go straight. That if it moves off a little one way or another, you can be in big trouble. But that's the entry pipe to me is probably the most worrisome part to put on the gun. And I get that on the butt plates are pretty tricky. What I do is if I have to make a butt plate, there you do that first, of course. But when I get ready to install the thing, I take like a heavy paper, thin cardboard, like a cereal box, say. Take a piece of that and I lay the butt plate on it, and I draw around the butt plate and I cut that out. But you got to remember that the side that you're tracing, where your pencil mark goes, is going to be on the inside of the stock. You have to put it, situate it in the right direction. I do that on both sides and draw a line so that the thing is straight and not cocked. And then I saw out, take a coping saw or whatever works for you. Just roughly saw out the shape on the wood, but leave maybe an eighth of an inch of waste, if you will. And then I just start putting a butt plate on, and you remember to maintain the return on the plate. The top part up at the heel has to be a straight line with the comb of your stock. So that's the most critical thing, is to get that so it's not stilted with the rest of the wood, and then get the plate, the curvature of the plate to come down. And it just takes a lot of time and a lot of trial and error and a lot of cuss words, and it just whatever it takes to make the thing where it fits the wood well. Sometimes I'll have a little problem where for whatever reason it doesn't want to. I get a gap that's hard to get rid of. I'm talking like a 32nd of an inch. You want perfect fit is what you strive for. If I have a problem like that, I can sometimes peen the plate a little bit, cheat on it that way to close the gap, and just um, take your time and get it as good as you can. The screws, the top screw that's on the return of the plate, I drill a hole in the plate, of course, for the screw hole, and then I'll mark that with a pencil or something down inside the butt plate to the wood to locate that hole. Well, I don't drill a hole right there. I move it forward about a 16th of an inch or so, just so that as you tighten that screw down, it draws that butt plate to its final resting place. And the one on the long end of the plate is not as critical as far as location as the top one. I just drill it right where it marks, and then just draw them up good and tight. And if it don't work, then you got to go back and fix it. Sometimes I've had to plug a hole and start over. It's just the way it works sometimes. You just take your time and do it a little at a time, and don't get in a hurry, and eventually it'll come out.
Different types of, was there various types of ways that they attach the ribs to the barrel, under ribs and barrel? That they solder it,
Well, it depends on, like the Hawken rifles. The barrels were heavy enough on those. You had room to tap and thread them. the screws to hold the under rib on. Some like the Fowlers and real light barrel guns, some of those are soldered on. The Hawkens, we don't do that. I make screws, usually 6 of them to hold a rib on, and I usually make the threaded end like 640, so you get a lot of thread, and really 4 or 5 threads is enough for a screw. You don't need a whole lot more than that. So I drill the holes just far enough to get the amount of threads I want. Then when I make the screw, I thread the part. Then the outer part, I have dimensions at home. I turn like a shank, but leave it long, and I have it the proper size, so that when I drill the under rib, I drill the tap hole first all the way through. I know how deep I want it to go into the barrel. Drill that hole. I take that out, and I put a clearance drill just to clear big enough to clear the threads on this screw, to clear that, and then I put an end mill of the right size, and then recess that hole so it's flat on the bottom, like a shoulder inside it, which the screw that I make goes against that, goes into the barrel and secures it. And when I get them all done, and I tighten them down, put a little Loctite on the threads just for good measure, and then I put them in the mill and knock the end of the screw off so that they're flush with the rod, and sometimes I'll peen them over a little bit, but stuff. And when you get done, you have to really look for them to find them.
The screws that you're talking about, I noticed that the slot in the screw is always straight with the. How do you get it to stop and be straight?
On the under ribs, I don't worry about that because there's no slot in those. I just make those so they bottom out in the barrel and the shoulder on the rib at the same time, and knock those down. The wood screws, I got to go. I make my own machine screws too for the thang bolts and the lock bolt and all that. And I'll make those. I turn them on a lathe. Start with a rod, cold rolled rod. Turn them the right size. Thread them how much threads I want on them. And then I bevel the thing, 60-degree bevel on the top, and screw those in while it's still on the rod. Screw those in place until they're tight as I want. And I take a Sharpie and mark both sides of the screw so that I know where to put the slot. And when I take it out and I cut the thing off and get ready to make finish the head of the screw, I have these index marks that I make my screw slot with. And if you hold your tongue just right, get everything just right, when you tighten them up with the screwdriver, they'll come up linear. Wood screws, you just have to have a bunch of them the same size, and I keep trying them until I get the ones that line up how I want them. But it's a little bit tricky. And again, you look on a lot of the old guns, and they're not linear. But a lot of times you can look, and especially on a patch box gun where they're all different directions, you can look and you can pretty much tell that the screws aren't in place. They've been taken apart and put back in the wrong order again. But I think buying away, they tried to make everything linear with the screw slots. That's what I do. I think they just look more finished that way. Well, I hope we didn't. Surely haven't answered all these questions yet.
About relieving the muscle. Did the Hawkins have any relieved muscles,
Like coning?
toning, or anything like that?
That's a good question too. I think some of them may have been relieved where you could start the ball with your thumb. But then again, it comes down to a question: well, was it done intentionally, or is that ramrod wear? The old guns will get eventually they'll get, I call it bell muzzle. They'll be bigger at the end than they are down inside there. Like when you get an old gun, you want to determine what caliber it is, you have to get something to stick down inside the bore because right at the end they're going to be bigger. Whether it was done intentionally or not, I don't know. I don't do it. I crown my if I have to cut a barrel off, I crown it. I use rice barrels, and if it's the length, if it comes a length that I need for the gun, then I leave it alone because they do a fine job as far as finishing and doing their barrels. Their their crown at the end of the muzzle is perfectly in line with the bore, and which when you cut one off, you have to be careful about that. But it will affect how the ball comes out of the barrel. But as far as if that was done intentionally, I don't know. I don't know.
I know you use solid underribs typically. The original ones use sheet metal underribs, or did they always use solid ones back in the shop?
Well, today about the only ones you can get are machine um, solid. I sometimes I'll relieve them, put them in the end mill, and relieve the inside of them just to slightly lighten the weight of the barrel, make them a little bit less barrel muzzle heavy. The original ones were formed over a mandrel from sheet metal, done in a forge. And you look at the original guns; they'll have on the end, on each end of the underrib, there'll be like a little half moon of solder that they filled when they installed them on the gun. They filled them with solder or lead or something just to keep so that nothing gets down inside there. And that's so you look at the real ones; they'll have a solder in the end of them. What I do with mine, if I'm going to leave the thing solid, not relieve the inside of it, I'll take a round file and file the ends of the inside ends of the underrib, and then I tin them with solder, and then after it's on the barrel, then I fill them with solder so they look like the original ones did. But I've never seen an original Hawken that the rib was soldered on. They've all been screwed or riveted, whatever you want to call it. Hmm? What? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Hey, anybody got any? Hopefully more.
Scrape the ramrod, or how do you make your ramrod?
I start with an oversized rod, usually a half-inch rod for my guns, 54 caliber. I make the rod pipes they're soldered onto the underrib. By the way, the rod pipes are. I usually leave those about half-inch or a little bit smaller, and I start with a half-inch ramrod, hickory rod, and I have I don't know what the proper name is for it. It's a flat plate with drill size holes in it, drill gauge or whatever you want to call it. I put that in a vise. I have a vise with rubber padded jaws. I put that in the vise with the jaws to give it a little flexibility. And I stick the rod in the biggest one or the smallest one that it'll fit, and I pull it through, cock it a little bit, and pull it through that plate, and that'll shave off. You'll get wood shavings, and they can be long. You know, the chips. I turn it an eighth of a turn, do it again, keep doing that until it'll go into the next size hole, and then I do that and until it gets continue to do that until it gets to the diameter that I want. Normally, normally on my guns, I leave the rod pipes half-inch, and then I drill a 7/16 hole into the stock just to give it a little, remove just a little less wood there, and then taper the rods to match that so they only go in one direction. And then I like to leave the rods on my guns where it takes a little bit of effort to get them out. Because if you don't, if you fit them where they're real easy to move in and out, a lot of times when you're shooting a gun, the recoil will cause a rod to come out a little bit. So I leave them tighter to avoid that. And usually on the end of the rod, I take a copy like the originals. They were about maybe 2.5 inches long, a tapered iron end that goes on the inside of the rod with a drilled and tapped 832 hole so a guy can put a cleaning jag on it, wipe the barrel out in the field.
The range rod, I see a lot of guns where the range rod sticks out past the end of the barrel. On the Hawken, what is the right amount that it should go? Should it go past the end of the barrel at all?
I don't like them to stick out past the barrel because then you're snagging it on stuff all the time. And you can break your rod easily. What I do with mine, I cut the rod slightly below the muzzle of the gun. That way, when you're cutting your patch off with your knife, you don't hit the rod. And so I leave that a little bit shorter than the length of the barrel. And on that end of the rod, I maybe a half or 3/4 of an inch. I cover that with brass. I turn a piece of brass and recess the rod and pin it on there, just because that's the way the real ones were done. Some of those were really long, like 2 inches. I think they look funny. I leave mine about 3/4 of an inch or so. To me, they just look better. I think I covered a rod.
How many different types of wood do they make? They use to make it gun style.
The guns that I've looked at, I'm going to guess probably, and this is just a guess, about 80% maple, about 20% walnut. And I had one original squirrel rifle that was birch. So they did make a few out of other than walnut and maple, but I've never seen a original cherry gun or like that. They've I'd say 80% of them are probably maple.
The range rod, you said that they were hickory typically. What do you do to the hickory rod to make it so that it doesn't break?
Oh yeah. I'm glad. Good point. Years ago, I was told by a man named Bob Favor, who a lot of us know, what they would do is soak the rods in fuel oil. So I have a couple of pieces of pipe made up, and when I get a rod, I mark a date on it, like a month and a year. I stick it into that pipe that's full of fuel oil, and just let them sit. It doesn't matter how long. You can. I've got some that have been there probably 10 years, and what that does, the oil permeates the wood and makes it a little bit more flexible so that the wood fibers can slide a little bit rather than crack. I've never tried it, but I've been told that you can take one and almost bend it end to end, but I've never tried that, but it does make one a lot more flexible and a lot tougher.
When you say fuel oil, are you saying like kerosene?
Yeah, like
kerosene?
like you use in a lamp, like a kerosene lamp. And it doesn't matter if it's red or green or whatever. Color doesn't show anyway. But that's what I do with the raw rods. And then when I get ready to taper them, like we talked about before, get them to their final size. When you pull it through, sometimes you can see a little smoke come off from the oil, and you can smell it. But it doesn't hurt. Epoxy goes right through it. Doesn't hurt that at all. It's stained. You can stain the rod. It really works well. And I like to have them at least 2 or 3 years in the oil. Come bail me out, Bob.
Let him suffer.
Yeah, as long as people got something they want to talk about, sure. That's called a wear plate. What the question is, the toe plates on the gun, they mostly all got that, but some will have a plate on the forearm of the gun called a wear plate. That's for, well, we can put it over the, the horn on a saddle and it won't, wear through your wood. I think a lot of those were maybe mistakes where the drill came out the bottom of the stock and put a wear plate on it to fix that. I did have a gun recently I built for a guy. He wanted a wear plate on it, and so I put one on there. Again, you gotta make the thing, and they're a little tricky to put on because you're fitting them lengthwise, depthwise, and width at the same time. But they look nice on the gun.
Iron or brass?
Iron. If I'm doing an iron gun, I do them iron. I've never put one on a brass gun, but if I were to do a brass mounted gun, I would do it in brass.
What percentage of Hawken would you say were brass versus iron?
Well, there are several. Normally, when you see a brass Hawken, you think squirrel rifle or sporting rifle, or whatever you want to call it, lighter local trade gun. But there are several original plains rifles that are brass. So either one is correct. I would say probably 95 or 8% of the plains rifles were iron. The squirrel rifles, the majority of those are brass. I have seen a few iron mounted squirrel rifles. What we call a squirrel rifle is a lighter, shorter, lighter, smaller caliber gun. They can be either walnut or maple, either one. I've got one of each upstairs on display. But most of those are brass, and all iron screws, no brass screws on any of them.
I think the squirrel rifle that you have, is it the underrib, like two different pieces?
I have, I don't know if mine is. I have seen them. The squirrel rifles are a little different. They were recycling parts, especially on those. It's very common to see a squirrel rifle with a recycled barrel on it. One of mine has that. It's had where you can tell it has closed dovetails where sights and underlugs were on the original gun that the gun was mounted to. I don't know whether they took these guns in trade or whether they bought parts, but they definitely used parts on a lot of guns. The one squirrel rifle I have upstairs, and I couldn't tell you if the lock was on another gun or if it was a hardware store lock. The question is, it was cut out for a drum and nipple, a round recess for the drum. And on a bolster gun, that doesn't work. The bolsters are wider and not as deep. But this gun has a dovetail that's brazed in place, and I'm sure it was to fill or patch a lock plate that was recessed for a drum and nipple. And so they did that, and so they could fit a breech to it. That's a common thing. I've seen several of them that were done that way. My gun, I say, has a closed dovetail on top where the sight was, rear sight was on the original gun it was on. And on the bottom flat of the barrel, it has a closed dovetail there for where the underlug on the original gun was located. But they used, they were making money. They were doing what they could to speed things up, just like I do, speed things up and get a good project and make it easy on everybody.
You speed up, I never noticed that.
Well, I say speed up. I'm like a sloth.
Slanted breech versus straight breech?
That's a great question too. There's all kinds of misinformation about that. What we're talking about is when you look on a plains rifle, squirrel rifles don't have it. They're patent breech or semi-patent breeches. A semi-patent breech is one that's the the tang and the part that screws in the barrel are made in one piece. A patent breech has a brake in the middle of it with a lug on the back of the part that screws into the barrel. They're made to come apart. At that junction, there's two different forms of that. If you look at it, the crack, if you will, between the two parts of the breech will be perpendicular with the bore on a straight breech gun. A slant breech, they'll be at an angle. And it's been commonly written in many articles and books that straight breech guns are early ones and slant breech are late ones. Well, that's a bunch of hooey too. You can go upstairs and look. There's very early J&S guns with slant breeches. There's very late S. Hawken guns with straight breeches. Why that is, I have no idea. Whether they had somebody making the breeches for them and how they came is the way they were, or I don't know if they made any of those in the shop. I'm sure I think they had the ability to make any part they needed on any particular day. Maybe that's part of the reason, but you can't, that's not a reliable dating thing on a gun, because the parts, and again, the slant breech and the straight breech guns are used all the way through production. Same with forged versus cast iron parts. The cast parts are definitely later than the forged parts, but you'll see later guns. To me, a good way to halfway, not really date a gun, but to consider whether it's early or late, is to look at the corner of the butt plate, where the forward extension comes and the part goes down. At that junction, the later guns will have a square corner, a sharp corner, where the two parts come together, meets the wood up in that corner. The earlier stuff will be rounded. It'll be rounded, and then again, I've seen cast butt plates that are rounded corners and cast butt plates that are square corners. Um, Again, I think they had the ability to make whatever part they needed. If they were short a butt plate that day, they sent the guy out to the forge and made them. They were made in the forged ones were made in two pieces. The line, the part where they join the two pieces of the butt will be curved around the top, and it'll have they were brazed together. They would put a rivet up in the heel of the stock, a rivet joining the two parts together to hold them together when they put them in the forge, to let the brass run to mold them or to weld them. I have seen original butt plates that you look at on the inside of the butt plate at that juncture, and you'll see little pieces of square. It's in the casting, square chunks and pieces and slivers and stuff that are there. Well, what that was, they made that butt plate from a mold from a forged butt plate that they made. And when they would make the butt plate, I say they riveted them together and put the borax or whatever they used for flux on them. And they would take pieces of brass, little scrap brass, chunks and pieces of it, put inside that cavity, with it up in the forge, and let the forge heat and melt that brass. Well, not all of the brass melted that way. It's what those square remnants are from. Well, from a handmade butt plate.
Thank you, Bob.
Oh, well, thank you all for coming.